legislature, Commissioner Zelli, and I devised the Corridors of Commerce initiative a year ago to both advance projects which could be funded thanks to Commissioner Zelli's careful look at how the transportation funding could be saved, spent more efficiently, and the like, and he deserves great credit, Commissioner, for accomplishing that, and there'll be more of those savings and efficiencies in the future if the situation calls for that. And it was also designed to find projects that were urgently needed and ready to go, so that we could show Minnesotans that if we increase our investment in transportation, they will get and they will see immediate and better returns. Much as the Legacy Amendment was remarkable because Minnesotans voted to raise their own sales tax or regressive tax because it believed it was going to provide things that they wanted: clean water, arts and humanities, better outdoor recreation opportunity, habitat for wildlife. Minnesotans have a chance in the next year or so to look at what they want to spend for transportation, what they want to invest. We won't be able to do anything if I return, or even if I don't, without public support. I say there are two things that Minnesotans agree upon with regard to transportation funding. One is that we need to spend more to improve our roads, highways, bridges, public transit. And the second is no one wants to pay for it. And there's about a $6 billion gap between those two views over the next 10 years that no one wants to face up to, and legislators have preferred to avoid for most of the last 25 years. And we see the consequences in increased congestion, in increased drive times, poor conditions, more traffic accidents and fatalities. So the time of reckoning is upon us, and there's no easy way out. To do nothing means things will continue to get worse. To do something means we can maintain the status quo, and to do what's really needed will require everybody to pitch together and put politics aside and really come down to a shared view of what we want our state to look like, especially for our children and our grandchildren. Mr. Zelli, with that, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. About a year ago, I was in the middle of a series of visits with communities across Minnesota, from community groups, citizens, chambers of commerce, from Roseau all the way to Worthington. And Governor Dayton sent me out on a mission to find out what do citizens think about transportation, and no big surprise, Minnesotans care deeply about transportation, about individual projects, about mobility, about their quality of life, and they care that Minnesota has a great transportation network. So I learned in my conversations, especially with business leaders, that freight traffic is of considerable concern. Moving freight is key to business success. And so business leaders also see the value of having a sound transportation system, both the system we have and also how to make it better. So as Governor Dayton pointed out, we have recognized that, and along with the state legislature, initiated the Corridors of Commerce program in 2013. Since that period, and with this announcement, we will be dedicating $331.5 million to 27 projects across the state. Now this latest announcement, this latest round of funding, will encompass 13 projects, and they're valued at $70 million. In 2014, the legislature provided $25 million of Corridors of Commerce funding to help MnDOT get projects ready for construction over the next few years. In other words, this will be work to be done on, mostly to be done on engineering, purchasing right-of-way, to be able to be prepared to complete projects that are very important for Minnesota. The Twin Cities metro area projects are valued at roughly half, $12.5 million. That funding is used for projects such as the $5.5 million for Interstate 35, the Minnesota River crossing, $2 million to design new pavement, bridges, and manage lanes for Interstate 94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul. 6 projects are in greater Minnesota and also have a value of $12.5 million. These fundings are going mostly, again, toward design work and purchasing right-of-way for key, what I call strategic expansion. $7.3 million will be for the Highway 14 expansion between Owatonna and Dodge Center. Now another $45 million is becoming available through the bid savings and the efficiencies that we achieved just on the preliminary projects of the Corridors of Commerce program. So today we are devoting that fund to advance work on Highway 371, 4 lanes between Nisswa and Jenkins. That was originally programmed to be in 2018. We're going to be able to start construction now on that in the year 2016, 2 years earlier. So you may have heard we have been working hard at MnDOT to look for ways for more efficiency, ways we can conduct our business better. I will tell you, as a business person, I'm confident that we'll be able to do that, we'll continue to do that, without compromising the quality of the work or the services that MnDOT delivers. We need to make sure that we are using effective use of taxpayer dollars, and the Corridors of Commerce and all of our transportation projects are part of that. We know that progress on the Corridors of Commerce vision and maintaining the system we have cannot be achieved by efficiencies alone. Nonetheless, by making these kind of efforts and by announcing this project, we are actually being more efficient by being prepared, by having these projects ready when long-term funding does become available. So, thank you.
Would you respond to questions on this subject?
Governor, you mentioned that it can be a tough sell to get people to invest in transportation. What would you say to someone on the street who said, the roads seem okay to me, why do we need to spend this money?
Well, if somebody believes that and that's their experience in their everyday life, then they're probably not going to be supportive of additional revenues, and that's where we have to weigh in the balance. Also, to point out, again, the $6 billion that the task force I assembled projected two years ago, and I think MnDOT's largely confirmed it, that $6 billion shortfall over the next 10 years is just what's needed to maintain the status quo, just to keep the system basically as it is now, given the expected state and federal revenues. So we're going to have to spend more if we're going to just maintain what we have, and if we don't, it's going to get worse.
Governor, let me ask you about the gas tax, because we raised it a couple of years back, as you know. Going forward, getting more funds into the pot, is gas tax one of the things you are looking at in your administration right now?
Well, the trouble with the gas tax is it doesn't get us nearly where we need to go. But every cent raises about $121 million, and 68% of that goes to the state, and 29% goes to the counties, and 9% goes to local governments. I don't know if that adds up to 100%, but that's approximately it. And so the state effectively gets $77 million for these kinds of projects from an increase in the gas tax, and that's not beginning to be enough to do what needs to be done. So my personal opinion is that Minnesotans willing to go along in the legislature and take some real political courage and cost some legislators their careers, but they increased the gas tax 5 cents in 2007 or 8, and then MnDOT can describe the additional projects, particularly bridge repair, that was made possible by that funding, but I didn't see as a layperson, and I don't think most Minnesotans noticed a real result from that. That's what Corridors of Commerce is focused on doing, which is showing results. If you go up 94, you're going to see there's another lane towards St. Cloud. If you go Part of the Highway 14, you're going to see improvements there. If you go 371 south of, 71 south of Wilmer, you're going to see results there. And 610, just the near certainty that that is going to be completed in a timely fashion is the reason why there's a 30-acre industrial park up in Brooklyn Park that I went up for the dedication just a while ago. And they already have 2 headquarter companies that are locating there. And they said that wouldn't happen if they had known that 610 was going to be completed in the very near future. So those kind of specific projects are intended to show Minnesotans you're going to get some real benefits that you can see, that you can appreciate it every day of your lives, your commutes and the like, if you support the additional revenues that we need. And if you don't, then it's certainly your prerogative, but just realize that the system is going to continue to get worse.
Governor, you often say that the gas tax wouldn't be enough. You just said it now. What would be enough? What are some funding mechanisms that could get the state to closer to where it needs to be?
Commissioner Zelli and I put out a proposal, not a final proposal, but described how we could raise $6 billion over the next 10 years. It involves a sales tax on gasoline at the wholesale level. It involves taking some of the funds that are now going to other purposes that are transportation related and from the general fund and dedicating that. It involves using highway construction bonds. It's a combination. It's not a final proposal. It's not something I'm, by any means committed to today. I'm committed, if I'm reelected, to sitting down with legislative leaders and funding experts and MnDOT and officials and the commissioner, obviously, and saying, what do we need? Can we agree on how much we need? Can we agree on what we want to accomplish over the next decade? And then can we decide among ourselves how best to fund that? And every good idea will be welcome. But I'm going to speak at the business partnership this evening, and I'm going to make this the primary topic, because if we just keep avoiding it, as has been done mostly by policymakers and politicians for the last 25 years, the situation is going to continue to get worse. And I think a preponderance of Minnesotans recognize that that's just not viable, and it's certainly not going to be viable for our children and grandchildren when you start years and decades down the road. So it's I think it's a really critical time for transportation funding, and it's really crucial that politicians and policymakers face up to that, and again, really face up to what the consequences are of doing nothing or doing very little.
Governor, can you talk about the timing of this particular announcement? We're in the heat of a campaign, about 4 weeks. Your opponent is criticizing whether you're doing enough to keep roads progressing in greater Minnesota. Does it have anything to do with the campaign?
Well, I expect to be criticized for everything I do and anything I don't do for the next 28 days. It's just the norm at this point in the campaign season. I had nothing to do with these decisions, and I intentionally did not. So I couldn't be accused of trying to manipulate them for any political gain. I had nothing to do with the timetable that MnDOT is choosing to follow in this announcement today. So it's going to be hard, what I've said before is, you can't push a pause button and ask the state of Minnesota to pause while there's a campaign going on. As the incumbent, there's a lot of work for me to do, and I'm called upon to do that I should be doing. And it's going to continue right up through Election Day and beyond till the end of my term.
Governor, if one project can be done by squeezing savings out of MnDOT, some folks are bound to say, keep squeezing. What's realistic? What's the capacity?
Here's the squeezer in chief right here.
What's the capacity of that approach?
You've asked about what Minnesotans think about the system. I think there are people throughout the state who really do agree on the need. It is an honest debate about how we fund, probably from multiple sources. One of the aspects of efficiency that come is actually by investing to make sure that you maintain the system we have. The sheer arithmetic is by not investing properly, roads become less efficient, repairs are more expensive and costly. So actually, you can't squeeze efficiencies without proper capital investment. As a business person, I know depreciation happens whether you pay for it or not, and as the longer you wait, the more expensive it is. Depending upon which area of the state you talk to. If you talk to people in the city of St. Paul, we're looking at the Kellogg Bridge being weight restricted. That has a significant effect on commuting and on freight movements. And south of Duluth, when we had to weight restrict I-90, I-35, that had a serious effect on commerce. And we know that it's not just about business, it's about employees getting to jobs and getting to school. So we think by not having the investments has a significant inefficiency by not making the investments that's required. So, efficiency gets us to a certain point, and we're committed to doing that. And I think we're doing that well, and I think MnDOT has had a tradition. We're following along on that, but taking up the next step over the next 10 years requires some really, I think, a nonpartisan thought about how we move forward.
And just going kind of off of that, what is the ultimate hope that these improvements will do for the state?
Well, the Corridors of Commerce is really a program dedicated to filling in these interregional corridors. We call it commerce because they're really the trade routes between regional centers. It does involve main streets. I'm excited about even the Snelling Avenue project here, which is a project that's underway, but we're able to make more livability enhancements part of the program. There's a real economic return to doing projects right. But also, from passing lanes to developing strategic expansions. 371 is a very important corridor for tourism. We know that the economic impact that tourism has in our state is becoming even more significant than it is. And we have to be mindful that transportation isn't just for transportation. It supports our economy, really important for our environment and people's health. And that's kind of central to our vision, is that transportation is a support for what Minnesotans most care about, and I hear about that every day.
I'd just like to add, we're right now the recipients of 25 years of avoiding major transportation funding decisions here in Minnesota. With the one exception in 2008 of the gas tax increase, and the legislators lost their seats because of that. The last three governors have seen it convenient to just look the other way on transportation funding needs, and no tax increases are required. And I say that governors tend not to look at transportation projects that frequently, because you have to usually raise revenues, which means raising taxes and some kind of fees on people to pay for them. Your constituents have to endure months or years of delays and frustrations while they're being built. And then it's usually your successor who gets to come in and cut the ribbon and get the credit. So, there's doing something that has a short-term impact that may be less than desirable, like more revenues for a long-term benefit that will be far greater, but not readily apparent, is a tough one for politicians to swallow. And that's part of what's, in my opinion, what's been holding us up. The result is that we have had 25 years of underinvestment in our transportation system. And if that continues, you can just extrapolate the deterioration, the lack of capacity, the congestion, the delays, and everything else. Just extend that for another 10 or 20 years, and it becomes really disastrous at least for significant parts of the state. And conversely, you don't correct that overnight. The process that MnDOT has to go through to be responsible for the environmental permitting process, for the right-of-way acquisitions, for in engineering and the like, and then the construction. I mean, we're talking about projects that if you start them now, major projects, are going to take 5 years or longer to complete before people see those benefits. And yet if decision makers are not willing to stand up and do what I think most of them know has to be done and persuade, and that's why Commissioner Zelli's work traveling around the state has been so important, to show Minnesotans, from somebody who has the expertise, the department who's entrusted to develop a plan for Minnesota, what is at stake here? And hopefully once the political dust settles, we'll be able to all pitch in together, because it will take business. It's going to take business leadership. It's going to take a bipartisan approach. It's going to take an ability to set aside some of the politics that dominated the last years and prevented anything from happening, to set that aside so we can make some progress.
Governor, you mentioned that you're going to make this a component of your speech tonight to the business groups. Have the business groups been too timid about voicing the need and the path to transportation?
I think businesses are like most Minnesotans, they want more investment and they don't want to pay for it. You know, I mean, I think the business groups were instrumental in getting the gas tax increase passed. And, you know, from all accounts, it would not have happened without them. I was in New Ulm several months ago and met with the chamber there, and there they have a number of people who have trucking businesses, and they are well aware of the serious problems caused by a lack of capacity. And they're willing to support, you know, at least in theory, in the abstract, a revenue increase of some sort to pay for more highway work. I said, well, you know, you need to, it's great that you're willing to do that. You also need to persuade your other executives in your companies. You need to persuade the employees in your companies. Because, you know, legislators are reflectors of what the prevailing mood is in their districts. That's how they got elected, and that's what they'll need to do to be reelected. So you can't ask people to, that's why we're trying to present this in a way that over time persuades people that what's at stake here and the direction that we're heading, absent some change. And, you know, it's very hard to do that in the middle of a political campaign, so that's why Commissioner Zelli started almost 2 years ago, and will continue this if he has reason to continue after the election, because it's going to take a sustained effort. It is going to take business support.
Could someone from the department talk about how many lane miles we're talking about here in the 2015 projects? It looks like there's shorter splotches of orange up there than there have been in other years. What are we talking about in terms of how many miles of highway are going to be touched by this program?
I'm looking at my experts, but you know, I think that the actual lane miles, sometimes it's important, sometimes it's really about critical bottlenecks that actually free up the entire system. And if you look at some of the engineering and work that we're doing, even on Interstate 94, okay, that's 9 miles, but that is probably the most heavily traveled route. We have to start the planning now for pavement replacement and some of the bridge work and figuring out these puzzles. But that's one that's well in advance. Others, we know, like purchasing right-of-way on Highway 14, that could come fairly soon. But we know that purchasing right-of-way is often the most difficult and uncertain part of a project. And so that might be I'm not sure if that's 3, 5, 6 miles. It's not that many miles, but when you think about the traffic and the additional trucking companies, and with what is the growth we expect to see in Rochester, it's a critical corridor. So rather than just plan by looking in the rearview mirror, we actually are looking forward to where these corridors will really make a difference for Minnesota's future prosperity.
And I also say, you know, $70 million, which is what became available through the efficiencies and the competitive bidding on the previous projects, doesn't buy a lot of lane miles in terms of actual construction. And that's, you know, one of the shifts when I started this pursuit, you know, a long time ago. You could build a highway for the amount of money it now costs just to do an engineering study. I mean, literally, the cost of these projects is you know, greatly outstrips the fiscal capacity of local governments, and stretching the capacity of state governments. And the federal government, you know, is such dire fiscal straits that they're not able to do what they should be doing, which is making major investments in our infrastructure improvements, instead of just trying to, you know, borrow to pay for current consumption. So we'll put ourselves behind the 8 ball here as a country, and it's going to be a challenging way to get out of it. But the states that face up to that and get out are going to have far better futures, socially and economically, for their citizens than states that avoid it.
Okay, that's all we have time for, folks.
Well, anything else? Anything else?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So the deal is that some of this money comes for studies, and the studies are going to take